Many people assume it must also carry very little consequence. One of the most interesting things about human behavior is how easily people are convinced by decisions that feel easy in the moment. If something takes very little effort today, many people assume it must also carry very little consequence tomorrow. Because there is no immediate cost, the decision starts to feel pleasant, almost as if life has quietly offered something for free. Yet life rarely works in a way where anything truly arrives without a price. Every decision carries some kind of payment, even if that payment is not collected right away. The problem is that the timing of the payment is often separated from the moment the choice is made, which makes it easy for people to underestimate the real cost. Think about how often people choose the option that feels comfortable in the moment. Someone might decide to postpone learning a skill that could improve their opportunities. Another person might decide discipline can wait until tomorrow, believing that one small delay could not possibly affect the direction of their entire future. Since nothing dramatic happens the next day, the decision feels justified. The mind slowly forms a quiet conclusion that the choice carried no real consequence. The day after postponing effort looks almost the same as the day before. The person wakes up, follows their usual routine, and sees that life appears unchanged. On the surface, it seems like nothing important was lost. But the true cost of many decisions is not meant to appear immediately. Life often allows someone to enjoy the comfort of the decision first, while the cost slowly builds somewhere out of sight. During that time, the person may continue making similar choices, each one appearing harmless on its own. What makes this pattern dangerous is not one single decision. A single choice rarely decides the direction of an entire life. The real danger comes from the pattern that forms when many small decisions begin pointing in the same direction. Imagine someone who repeatedly chooses convenience instead of preparation. One day they skip studying something important because it feels unnecessary. Another day they delay practicing a skill because there seems to be plenty of time later. Each choice feels small, and because the immediate result is invisible, the mind begins to treat the behavior as acceptable. Soon, the pattern becomes normal. What once felt like a temporary shortcut slowly becomes the standard way of handling responsibility. The person becomes comfortable postponing effort because life has not yet shown any obvious consequences. Comfort can be very persuasive when it arrives disguised as harmless convenience. It quietly suggests that everything will probably work out later, and that effort can always be applied at a more convenient time. Since nothing appears to fall apart right away, the illusion grows stronger with each repeated decision. Many people eventually reach a point where they feel they have discovered a kind of secret. They start believing certain responsibilities can be delayed indefinitely without creating serious problems. Because the bill has not yet arrived, they assume the transaction required no payment at all. The problem with that belief is that reality operates with far more patience than most people expect. Life does not rush to show the consequences of every decision right away. Instead, it quietly records the direction those decisions are moving a person over time. During that process, a person may feel completely comfortable. The absence of immediate feedback creates a sense of safety, as if the choices carry no long-term significance. The person may even encourage others to adopt the same relaxed attitude toward effort and preparation. What they cannot see is that every comfortable decision is slowly building a structure that will eventually reveal itself. Each day adds another small piece to that structure. Each repeated choice strengthens the direction the person is moving. The illusion of free choices continues as long as the consequences remain invisible. For weeks, months, or even years, someone may move forward, believing they have avoided the cost that normally comes with discipline and effort. They may think they have found a way to live comfortably while still expecting impressive results in the future. But life has never operated on that arrangement. Results are not created by hope or intention alone. They are built through the steady accumulation of decisions that either support progress or quietly prevent it. Every time someone chooses comfort instead of preparation, certain opportunities become less likely to appear. Every time responsibility is avoided, certain forms of growth are postponed. These changes may not be obvious at first, but they gradually shape the landscape of the future. What looks like a harmless decision today is actually a small vote for the kind of life that will exist tomorrow. Each vote may seem minor on its own, but thousands of them eventually decide the outcome of the election. The illusion of free choices disappears the moment someone begins to see this process clearly. Once a person understands that every decision carries either a delayed cost or a delayed reward, the entire structure of daily behavior begins to look different. Suddenly, the small decisions no longer feel insignificant. Choosing comfort instead of effort no longer seems harmless. It becomes clear that what feels easy today may become expensive tomorrow. Life does not remove the price attached to our decisions simply because the payment has been postponed. It only delays the moment when that price becomes visible. During that delay, people often continue making the same choices that created the situation in the first place. That is why many people move through long periods believing they have avoided the normal rules of cause and effect. The absence of an immediate bill creates the illusion that the transaction required no payment. Only later does the truth begin to appear. The moment someone understands that every choice carries a cost, the illusion starts losing its power. What once looked like a free decision now appears for what it truly is, an agreement to pay a price later. And life, with remarkable patience, never forgets to collect. One of the most deceptive things about life is that consequences are not always immediate. A person can make certain decisions for a long time without seeing any visible reaction from the world around them. Because nothing appears to change right away, the mind begins assuming that nothing important is happening beneath the surface. This delay can be very convincing. When someone postpones an important responsibility and nothing dramatic happens the next day, it becomes easy to believe the decision carried no real importance. The person wakes up, goes through their daily routine, and finds that life looks exactly the same as it did before. From the outside, it appears as if the world has quietly accepted the behavior without objection. No alarm sounds, no opportunity disappears instantly, and no dramatic consequence shows up demanding attention. Because the result remains invisible, the person becomes more comfortable repeating the behavior again. Life has a way of allowing people to postpone payment for certain decisions. Someone may delay learning the skills needed for advancement. Another person might ignore opportunities that require effort and preparation. In many cases, nothing happens right away to show that those decisions have started shaping the future. The days continue moving forward normally. The person continues working, resting, socializing, and living life as usual. Since the consequences remain hidden for a while, the person begins assuming the cost may never appear at all. This period of delay can last much longer than most people expect. Sometimes it stretches across years, giving the impression that the earlier decisions truly carried no serious effect. The longer the delay continues, the stronger the illusion becomes that certain responsibilities can be avoided without lasting consequences. However, while the consequences may be delayed, they are never canceled. During the quiet period when everything appears normal, something else is happening beneath the surface. The small decisions repeated each day are slowly shaping the range of possibilities that will exist later. Imagine a person who repeatedly chooses not to develop a skill that could expand their opportunities. At first, the decision feels harmless because their current situation remains stable. The job continues, the paycheck arrives, and life moves forward without interruption. Over time, however, the world around that person keeps changing. Industries evolve, expectations increase, and opportunities begin favoring people who prepared themselves earlier. The person who postponed learning may not notice these changes at first because they develop gradually. Each year passes with only small differences from the year before. The person remains comfortable believing their earlier decisions were harmless because nothing dramatic has happened. Yet quietly, the range of options available to them has begun shrinking. Deferred consequences often appear through limitation rather than sudden loss. Instead of a dramatic event announcing a problem, the person simply notices that certain doors are no longer opening. Positions that require new abilities remain out of reach, and opportunities that once seemed possible begin appearing less often. What makes this situation difficult to recognize is that the connection between cause and effect may be separated by many years. The person experiencing the limitation may not immediately connect it to decisions made long ago. To them, it simply feels as though circumstances changed without explanation. Life rarely presents the consequences of behavior with a detailed explanation of how they developed. Instead, it simply reveals the results that have been forming quietly over time. The person may feel surprised by the outcome because the earlier decisions seemed so small when they were made. Yet the accumulation of those small decisions has been shaping the outcome for years. Each postponed responsibility added another delay to progress. Each ignored opportunity quietly removed a possible path that could have existed later. The delay between action and consequence creates the dangerous impression that behavior can continue without affecting the future. Because the payment does not appear immediately, people often assume the bill has been forgotten entirely. But life works on a system that carefully records patterns. It does not rush to show the results of those patterns because many outcomes take time to develop. Just as a field needs months to reveal what was planted, the results of behavior also need time before they become visible. During that growing period, everything may look calm and unchanged. A person might look around and see no evidence that earlier decisions are shaping anything important. The field looks quiet, and the soil shows nothing about what is developing underneath. Eventually, however, the season arrives when the results must appear. The field reveals what has been planted, whether intentionally or through neglect. In the same way, the consequences of postponed responsibility eventually show up in the form of limited progress, missed opportunities, or abilities that were never fully developed. Deferred consequences do not appear suddenly because life wants to surprise anyone. They appear gradually because many outcomes take time to mature. The years between decision and result are simply the time required for those outcomes to take shape. Understanding this helps explain why some people seem to move through life without consequences for a long time. It is not because their decisions have no effect. It is because the results of those decisions are still forming beneath the surface. Eventually, the moment arrives when the accumulated effects can no longer remain hidden. What once seemed harmless begins revealing its influence on the present situation. Opportunities that could have existed are no longer there, and the gap between expectation and reality becomes easier to see. At that moment, Many people feel as if something unfair has happened. They may believe life suddenly changed without warning. In reality, life did not change suddenly at all. It simply revealed the outcome that had been quietly forming for years. Deferred consequences are not mysterious forces appearing without cause. They are simply the delayed results of patterns that were allowed to continue long enough to shape the future. And when that future finally becomes visible, the connection between past decisions and present circumstances becomes clear. There comes a moment in many lives when the distance between expectation and reality becomes impossible to ignore. For a long time, someone may move forward with a clear picture in mind about how things will eventually turn out. They may believe success will arrive naturally with time, or that the future will somehow correct the small delays and overlooked responsibilities of the past. For years, nothing seems to challenge that belief. Life continues in an ordinary way, and the absence of immediate consequences allows the person to feel confident that everything is still progressing as expected. Then, one day, a moment arrives when the results of many earlier decisions are suddenly standing right in front of them. It may happen during a conversation when someone the same age describes opportunities that seem far out of reach. It might occur when a person reviews their finances and realizes the progress they once expected never appeared. Sometimes it arrives during a quiet moment of reflection when someone compares where they are with where they once thought they would be. That moment can feel uncomfortable because it brings a clarity that had been avoided for years. The person begins to understand that their current situation is not the result of one sudden event. Instead, it is the accumulated result of many small choices made gradually over time. The gap between intention and outcome suddenly becomes visible. For a long time, the person may have believed they were still heading toward a certain destination. But when they pause and look honestly at their situation, they begin to see that the direction of their daily decisions was quietly leading somewhere else. This is what it feels like when reality sends the bill. It is not an angry message or a punishment delivered without reason. It is simply the presentation of results that have been forming quietly for a long time. Life does not send the bill with loud announcements. Instead, it reveals the outcome through the circumstances that now exist. The person begins to see the opportunities that never appeared, the progress that remained slower than expected, or the abilities that were never fully developed. At first, the realization can feel discouraging because the person begins to understand that time passed while certain preparations were delayed. They may remember the earlier years when they chose convenience over discipline or postponed responsibilities that could have changed their direction. It is important to understand that this moment of realization is not meant to condemn anyone. Its purpose is clarity. Reality is simply showing the accumulated results of the decisions made along the way. In many ways, this moment is one of the most valuable experiences a person can have. While it may feel uncomfortable, it replaces illusion with understanding. The person no longer has to guess why certain results appeared or why certain opportunities are missing. They begin to see that life has been responding consistently to the patterns of behavior guiding their decisions. Results that once seemed confusing or unfair suddenly become easier to understand when viewed through the principle of cause and effect. When someone recognizes this connection clearly, an important shift begins happening in their thinking. Instead of seeing circumstances as mysterious or accidental, they begin recognizing them as the logical outcome of repeated behavior. This realization often brings mixed emotions. On one hand, it can be difficult to accept that earlier choices shaped the present so strongly. On the other hand, it also reveals something encouraging. The same principle that created the current situation can also create a different future. The moment the bill arrives is also the moment responsibility becomes visible. A person begins to understand that the direction of life is not shaped by isolated events, but by patterns repeated day after day. Once this becomes clear, the person is no longer confused about where change must begin. They understand the future will not change through wishful thinking. It will change through different decisions repeated consistently over time. Many people spend years avoiding this moment of clarity because they are afraid of what they might discover. Yet avoiding the realization does not prevent the results from appearing. The bill still arrives, whether someone chooses to examine their behavior or not. Those who face the moment honestly gain something extremely valuable: the ability to understand how their present situation was created. Instead of feeling powerless, they begin to see that the process shaping their life has always been connected to their daily decisions. Reality sending the bill is not the end of the story. It is simply the moment when the account becomes visible. The person can finally see the total that has been building through years of choices. And once that total becomes clear, the person is no longer living in uncertainty. They understand how the present was built, and that understanding gives them the power to build the future differently. Once a person clearly understands how life produces results, something interesting begins to happen in the way they look at everyday decisions. Actions that once seemed small and unimportant begin to look very different. What once looked like a minor choice now starts to look like a vote for the direction the future will eventually take. Before someone understands this, many people treat daily decisions as if they are completely separate from each other. They believe each day mostly stands on its own, and that one small decision could not possibly influence the outcome of an entire life. Because the effect of a single choice seems so small, it becomes easy to underestimate how important it actually is. However, once someone realizes that life eventually collects the results of repeated behavior, those small decisions start to look very different. The person begins to see that life is not shaped only by a few dramatic turning points. More often it is shaped by the quiet repetition of choices made when no one else is watching. A person may start noticing that the difference between progress and stagnation is rarely caused by one major event. Instead, the difference usually shows up through the accumulation of hundreds of ordinary moments. These are the moments when someone decides whether to keep learning, whether to improve a skill, or whether to postpone the effort again. When these moments are viewed one at a time, they seem almost insignificant. One evening spent reading something useful instead of wasting time may not look like a major achievement. One day of disciplined preparation may not feel powerful enough to change the future. Yet when those decisions repeat over weeks and months, the effect becomes much greater than those individual moments suggest. Knowledge begins to build, ability slowly improves, and confidence grows naturally from preparation. At the same time, the opposite pattern can quietly produce a very different outcome. A person who repeatedly postpones effort may not notice any immediate loss. One evening of delay seems harmless, and a second evening feels just as small. However, when that pattern becomes routine, months can pass without meaningful progress. The person may still hope for significant results, but the preparation needed to create those results has not been happening. The power of daily decisions only becomes clear when someone looks at the process over time. One action rarely changes a life overnight. Instead, the future is shaped through the steady accumulation of behaviors that either move a person forward or quietly keep them in the same place. When this idea becomes clear, discipline begins to look very different. Before understanding this, discipline often appears unpleasant because it requires effort in the present moment. Many people assume avoiding effort today simply means enjoying greater comfort. What they eventually realize is that avoiding effort today usually means paying a larger price later. The comfort that seemed appealing at the moment slowly turns into limitation as time passes. Once someone clearly sees this connection, discipline stops looking like a burden and begins to look more like an investment. The effort required today is not just a sacrifice. It becomes a contribution toward a future that will eventually reflect the work being done now. Each small decision begins to carry more meaning because the person understands those choices are quietly shaping tomorrow's circumstances. Choosing to prepare today increases the opportunities that may appear later. Choosing to learn something new expands the range of possibilities that may exist in the future. Daily actions begin looking less like isolated tasks and more like building materials. Every productive habit adds another brick to the structure a person is building for the years ahead. Over time, that structure becomes strong enough to support opportunities that would have been impossible without preparation. People who understand this process stop waiting for motivation before they act. They realize that motivation can disappear at any time, but decisions can still be made even when enthusiasm is low. The important factor is not the mood of the moment, but the direction the behavior continues to follow. By making thoughtful decisions each day, a person slowly shapes the environment they will live in later. Skills grow stronger, relationships deepen, and opportunities become more likely because the preparation behind them has been happening consistently. It is important to recognize that the opposite pattern works just as consistently. When someone repeatedly chooses delay instead of preparation, life eventually reflects that pattern as well. The absence of effort slowly produces the absence of progress. One remarkable aspect of this process is how fair it tends to be. Life does not require perfection from anyone. It simply responds to the direction of behavior over time. Small improvements repeated consistently can create extraordinary results, while small delays repeated consistently can quietly prevent progress. When someone understands this principle, the day no longer feels like a collection of ordinary hours that can be spent casually. Instead, it begins to look like an opportunity to influence the direction of the future. Every decision carries a small amount of weight because it becomes part of the pattern that life will eventually respond to. The person no longer waits for dramatic moments to change their circumstances. They realize that real turning points are often hidden inside ordinary days. Recognizing the power of daily decisions changes the way someone approaches responsibility. Instead of avoiding effort whenever possible, they begin looking for ways to invest their time and energy wisely. They understand that the future is slowly forming out of the habits they practice today. And if life eventually sends a bill for every pattern of behavior, then the most sensible approach is to make sure the account being built is one that produces opportunity instead of limitation. Once someone understands that life eventually presents the results of every repeated behavior, a new way of thinking begins to form. Instead of hoping the future will somehow arrange itself favorably, the person begins to realize that the future is mostly determined by what is being invested today. The question is no longer whether a cost exists, but when that cost will be paid. Many people spend years trying to avoid the effort required for meaningful progress. They hope to enjoy the benefits of discipline without actually practicing it. They hope opportunity will appear without the preparation that usually makes opportunity possible. For a while, it may seem as if that approach works. The person avoids the difficulty of effort in the present moment, and nothing dramatic happens right away to challenge that choice. The days move forward comfortably, and the person continues believing the future will somehow work itself out. Eventually, however, they discover that avoiding effort today simply moves the cost into the future. Instead of paying the price now through discipline and preparation, they end up paying a larger price later through limited choices and missed opportunities. Life gives every person a choice about when the price of progress will be paid. One option is to postpone the effort and hope the consequences never appear. The other option is to accept the cost early and allow the rewards to appear later. The first option feels easier in the moment because it demands very little sacrifice. A person can delay learning, delay preparation, and delay responsibility while enjoying the comfort of the present. The problem is, the time keeps moving forward while the groundwork for the future remains unfinished. Eventually, the future arrives, and when it does, the person may realize that the opportunities they expected require abilities they never developed. The payment that was postponed now appears as limitations that could have been avoided. The second option often feels harder at the beginning. It requires effort when comfort would be easier. It requires preparation when postponement would feel more pleasant. The person must invest energy into work whose results may not appear immediately. Yet something interesting begins happening when someone chooses to pay the cost early. Each day of preparation quietly strengthens their position for the future. Every skill learned and every responsibility handled adds another layer of ability that will eventually become valuable. Over time, the person who pays the price early begins to experience a very different relationship with opportunity. Situations that look difficult to others begin to appear manageable because the preparation behind them has already been done. While others are surprised by the demands of new opportunities, the prepared person can respond with confidence. What feels overwhelming to someone who delayed effort becomes manageable for someone who invested in preparation earlier. Paying forward does not remove effort from life. Effort will always be required in some form. The real difference lies in when that effort is applied and what results it eventually produces. When effort is postponed for too long, it usually appears later as a problem that must be solved under pressure. When effort is applied early, it tends to appear later as an advantage that opens doors. This is why productive people learn to treat discipline as an investment rather than a punishment. They understand that every hour spent learning something useful is quietly strengthening their position for the future. Every responsibility handled properly becomes a foundation for greater opportunities later. Instead of asking how little effort is required to get through the day, they begin asking a more powerful question. They ask how today can be used to strengthen the future that is slowly approaching. The answer usually involves small actions repeated consistently. A person may spend time improving their understanding of something valuable. They may practice a skill that increases their usefulness in the marketplace. They may handle their responsibilities carefully instead of treating them casually. None of these actions appear dramatic on their own. One day of preparation rarely produces an immediate reward. Yet when those days accumulate, the results begin appearing in ways that are difficult to ignore. Opportunities start appearing more often because the person is prepared to handle them. Responsibilities increase because others recognize reliability and competence. Progress begins accelerating because the foundation supporting that progress has already been built. The remarkable part of this approach is that it changes the kind of outcomes life eventually delivers. Instead of receiving the bill for neglected responsibilities, the person begins receiving the rewards of preparation. Where others experience the consequences of delay, the prepared person experiences the advantages of foresight. The same principle of cause and effect is still operating, but the results look very different because the behavior behind them changed earlier. The future will always arrive carrying the accumulated results of the present. The only real decision someone has is whether those results will appear as limitations that must be overcome or as opportunities that can be embraced. When someone chooses to invest effort, learning, and discipline today, they are not simply working harder in the moment. They are choosing to pay forward the cost that life eventually collects from everyone. And when that payment is made in advance, the future responds in a very different way. Instead of sending a bill for neglected responsibilities, it begins delivering the rewards that preparation quietly earned over time. They assume the right break will eventually come along, that the right person will notice them, or that the right situation will appear and open the door that has stayed closed. Because of that expectation, people often spend long stretches of time waiting instead of building anything. They hold back their effort while watching the horizon, hoping for the moment when conditions finally become favorable. They believe progress will begin once the perfect opportunity arrives. And until that moment shows up, they allow themselves to stay in a holding pattern. The problem with this pattern is that waiting has a way of disguising itself as patience. A person can easily convince themselves they are simply letting time work in their favor. They may tell themselves the opportunity has not appeared yet, that the circumstances are not quite right, or that the timing will eventually improve if they just give things enough room to develop. Even though that kind of thinking may sound reasonable, it often keeps people standing still much longer than they realize. Days quietly turn into months. Months gradually become years, and the direction of a life begins to drift without someone fully noticing what is happening. Waiting starts to feel comfortable because it postpones the responsibility of making difficult decisions. The belief that someone will eventually arrive and change things can show up in many different forms. Some people believe a mentor will appear who will recognize their potential and guide them toward success. Others believe a lucky opportunity will suddenly open a path that had not existed before. Still others believe that better circumstances will eventually replace the problems they are dealing with right now. Even though these expectations may sound harmless, they create a way of thinking that keeps responsibility just slightly out of reach. When someone believes progress depends on something outside arriving, they naturally delay the effort that would move them forward. Their attention stays fixed on the possibility of rescue instead of the need to take initiative. At some point, though, a moment of clarity begins to appear. Sometimes it comes slowly, after years of watching and thinking. And other times it shows up suddenly, through experience. A person starts to realize that the arrival they have been waiting for does not seem to be getting any closer. The opportunity they expected someone else to provide never appeared, and the direction of their life is still exactly where their own decisions left it. That realization can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes a comforting illusion. It takes away the quiet belief that progress is simply delayed until the right person arrives. When that illusion disappears, something becomes clear that had always been there but had never been fully acknowledged. The direction of a life has always depended on the choices made each day. The progress someone has been waiting for has always been connected to the actions they were willing or unwilling to take. No outside arrival was ever responsible for creating that movement. This understanding does not appear to discourage someone. In many ways, it actually frees them. When a person realizes that no one else is coming to change their direction, the waiting finally stops. The horizon they had been watching loses its importance, and their attention begins to move towards something much more powerful. They start looking at what they themselves can build. Once the waiting disappears, time begins to look very different. Instead of watching the calendar pass while hoping circumstances will change, people start asking what they can do today that might influence tomorrow. The focus moves away from expectation and toward initiative. This is where many people start discovering something important about progress. Movement rarely begins with dramatic opportunities or extraordinary conditions. Most of the time, it begins with small decisions made consistently by someone who has stopped waiting for someone else to take control. When someone understands that no one is coming, they begin paying closer attention to their daily actions. They start noticing that every hour carries a choice about how it will be used. They see that effort applied today quietly shapes the results that appear months and years later. Instead of hoping circumstances will eventually change, they begin asking how their own decisions might create those changes. Instead of looking for someone to open a door, they start looking for ways to build one. Instead of watching time pass, they begin directing how that time will be invested. The end of waiting marks an important shift in a person's life. It replaces passive expectation with active responsibility. It replaces the hope that someone will step in with the understanding that progress begins through initiative. Once that shift happens, the future stops looking like something that simply arrives on schedule. It begins to look like something that responds to effort, discipline, and thoughtful decisions. The moment waiting ends is often the same moment progress quietly begins. Many people spend years hoping change will arrive from the outside, yet the people who eventually move forward discover a different truth. The most important arrival in their life was never going to come from someone else. It begins the moment they decide to begin. As people move through life, they often absorb certain expectations without realizing how deeply those expectations shape the way they think. Many of these beliefs are never formally taught, yet they slowly become part of someone's outlook through repeated experience. Over time, these assumptions quietly influence how people interpret problems, opportunities, and responsibility. During childhood, most problems are handled by someone else. When something goes wrong, parents step in with guidance, teachers provide direction, and authority figures offer solutions that keep things moving forward. A young person becomes used to the idea that when something becomes confusing or difficult, someone with more experience will eventually show up and help fix it. There is nothing wrong with that structure during the early years of life. Guidance is necessary while someone is still learning how the world works. Advice, instruction, and protection help people develop the knowledge and skills they will rely on later. However, if this pattern continues without being questioned for too long, it can quietly shape expectations that no longer help someone once they reach adulthood. Many people carry forward the belief that solutions will eventually come from somewhere outside themselves. They may expect an employer to determine the direction of their progress. They may believe fortunate circumstances will appear at the right moment. Others assume that if they simply remain patient, some outside force will eventually move things forward. This mindset usually is not caused by laziness or a lack of intelligence. In many cases, it develops because people have spent much of their life watching problems being solved by others. The mind becomes familiar with the idea that responsibility for fixing things belongs somewhere beyond the person experiencing the problem. As a result, people may unconsciously wait for help even when none is coming. The idea that someone will eventually step in can show up in subtle ways. A person may believe the right connection will suddenly change their career. Someone else may assume one lucky opportunity will instantly improve their circumstances. Others convince themselves that luck will eventually bring the breakthrough they have been hoping to see. Because of these expectations, people sometimes overlook the quiet opportunities already around them. Their attention stays focused on the dramatic event that might appear in the future rather than on the practical actions available right now. They wait for the extraordinary moment while ignoring the ordinary efforts that slowly build progress. The problem with this illusion is that it shifts responsibility away from the person living the life. If someone believes change depends on the arrival of something outside their control, they naturally feel less urgency about directing their own effort. Progress becomes something that might happen instead of something that must be built. Over time, this way of thinking can create a subtle kind of dependency. Instead of asking what they themselves can do to influence the direction of their life, people begin asking who or what might eventually help them do it. The question quietly shifts from personal initiative to outside assistance. Yet, the world rarely works according to that expectation. Circumstances do not organize themselves around someone's potential. Opportunities do not always arrive on schedule. And help does not always appear at the moment it would be most convenient. The direction of a life is usually shaped by actions taken long before favorable conditions appear. At some point, people begin noticing something important. The ones who seem to move forward consistently are not always the ones with the best circumstances. They are not always the ones with the most connections, the best starting point, or the most fortunate conditions. More often, they are the people who stopped expecting someone else to organize their progress. Instead of waiting for guidance to appear, they began creating their own direction. Instead of hoping an opportunity would show up, they began developing the ability to recognize and act on the opportunities already in front of them. This shift does not mean that help, cooperation, or advice have no value. Assistance from others can be extremely helpful when it appears. Guidance can speed up learning, and partnerships can expand what someone is capable of achieving. However, those things become powerful only when they support someone who has already taken responsibility for their own direction. When a person finally sees through the idea that someone else will rescue them, something very important changes. They stop organizing their life around the expectation that someone else will eventually provide the next step. They begin to realize that the responsibility for building that step has always belonged to them. Instead of asking who will create the opportunity, they begin asking how they might create it themselves. Instead of waiting for circumstances to improve, they start improving the way they use the circumstances they already have. Instead of hoping someone will guide their progress, they begin learning how to guide it on their own. This realization does not remove difficulty from life. Challenges still appear, obstacles still exist, and progress still requires effort. What changes is the way someone responds to those conditions. They stop looking outward for rescue and begin looking inward for direction. The illusion disappears, and responsibility quietly returns to the place where it had always belonged. Once that understanding settles into someone's thinking, the way they look at the future begins to change. They no longer measure progress by what others decide to provide. Instead, they begin measuring progress by the effort they're willing to invest and the decisions they are willing to make. The moment someone realizes that their future will not be built by outside forces is a powerful moment. It closes the chapter of waiting for rescue and opens the chapter of personal responsibility. From that point forward, progress becomes something a person builds rather than something they expect to receive. When someone finally realizes that no one else is responsible for directing their life, an important shift begins to take place in the way they think about responsibility. What once seemed like a heavy burden slowly starts to look very different. Instead of feeling like a weight that limits them, responsibility begins to feel like a tool that gives them control over their direction. For a long time, many people move through life believing that responsibility for major outcomes belongs somewhere outside themselves. They assume other people, organizations, or circumstances will eventually determine how far they're able to go. Because of that belief, they often underestimate how much influence their own decisions have over the direction their life takes. The moment that illusion disappears, something interesting happens. Responsibility no longer sits outside, waiting to be assigned by someone else. It moves directly into their hands, and once it arrives there, the way someone approaches life begins to change. Instead of waiting for instructions, they begin making decisions. Instead of looking around for permission, they begin trusting their judgment. Instead of assuming someone else will eventually organize their future, they begin realizing that the organization of their life has always depended on their own choices. This moment can feel surprising because it removes the final excuse for waiting. When someone believes another person is responsible for the next step, delay can feel justified. It becomes easy to assume progress must simply wait until the proper direction appears. Once responsibility becomes personal, delay begins to look very different. Time no longer feels like something that can be comfortably postponed. Each day begins to carry clearer meaning because someone understands their future is quietly being shaped by the decisions made during those hours. The way people view opportunity begins to change as well. When responsibility sits somewhere else, opportunities appear to be rare events that must be discovered or provided by others. A person may spend years hoping one big breakthrough will appear and instantly change the direction of their life. However, when responsibility moves into their own hands, opportunity starts to look less like a rare arrival and more like something that can be created. People begin noticing that progress is usually built through simple actions, repeated consistently, rather than dramatic events that appear out of nowhere. They begin paying closer attention to how they spend their time. They start evaluating their habits more honestly. They become more aware of the connection between the effort they invest today and the results that show up months or years later. This shift in perspective changes the way someone approaches effort. Instead of seeing effort as something that must only be applied when circumstances demand it, they begin recognizing effort as the main tool for shaping results. The energy they put into their work, their learning, and their discipline begins to feel like an investment rather than a temporary requirement. Responsibility changes the way people interpret difficulty. When someone believes another person is managing the direction of their life, challenges often appear as interruptions. Obstacles can feel like unfair events preventing progress from happening. Once responsibility becomes personal, those same challenges start to look different. Obstacles become signals that effort must increase, skill must improve, or strategy must change. Instead of waiting for someone else to solve the problem, people begin asking what actions they can take to move through it. This shift in thinking changes how someone looks at time too. The future is no longer something distant that will eventually arrive, regardless of their involvement. Instead, it becomes something that is quietly forming through the decisions they make every day. A person who understands this begins treating time with greater respect. Each day becomes an opportunity to strengthen their position or weaken it. The difference between those two outcomes usually comes from the choices made during ordinary moments that might otherwise seem unimportant. What makes this realization powerful is that it replaces uncertainty with clarity. When someone believes outside forces control their progress, the future feels unpredictable. They must wait to see what others decide, what opportunities appear, or what circumstances change. When responsibility belongs to them, the future becomes easier to understand. It becomes a reflection of discipline, decisions, and the willingness to act when action is required. Progress begins to feel less mysterious because its cause becomes clearer. At that point, something important begins happening in a person's life. They stop looking for someone else to direct their path and begin directing it themselves. Instead of wondering what might happen next, they begin deciding what they will do next. This change rarely starts with dramatic announcements or big declarations. It usually begins quietly through small decisions repeated consistently. A person decides to use their time more intentionally. They decide to improve the way they approach their work. They decide to strengthen habits that support progress. Over time, those decisions begin producing results that once seemed unlikely. The direction of a life starts changing, not because someone else arrived to manage it, but because the person accepted the responsibility that had always been there waiting. This is why the moment someone realizes that no one is coming is not a moment of discouragement. It is a moment of awakening. Responsibility returns to the person, and with it comes the ability to influence the direction of life in ways they may never have considered before. When that turning point arrives, the future stops feeling like something that must be waited for. It becomes something that can finally be directed. Once a person understands that responsibility for their direction belongs completely to them, another realization begins to follow. If no one else is managing the course of their life, then someone must step into the role of guiding it. That role cannot remain empty for long, because without direction, time and circumstances will quietly decide the path on their own. For many people, this is the moment when the idea of leading themselves begins to appear. Leadership is usually associated with guiding other people, organizing teams, or directing large efforts toward a shared goal. But before someone can lead others well, they first have to learn how to lead themselves. Leading yourself begins with something simple but powerful. It begins with deciding to set standards for your own behavior. Instead of letting moods, circumstances, or outside pressure decide what actions will be taken each day, a person starts deciding what standards they will live by. This can include deciding how they will approach their work, how they will spend their time, or how they will respond when difficulties appear. These choices may seem small at first, but they quietly create the structure that shapes the direction of a life. Without standards, behavior tends to drift toward whatever feels easiest in the moment. People often follow convenience rather than intention, and convenience rarely produces meaningful results. Leading yourself begins when someone realizes their daily actions need to be guided by purpose instead of temporary comfort. One of the most important parts of leading yourself is discipline. Discipline is often misunderstood as something harsh or restrictive, but in reality, it works more like a stabilizing force. It allows someone to keep moving toward their goals even when excitement fades or circumstances become difficult. Many people wait for motivation before they take action. They believe progress will become easier once they feel inspired or energized enough to begin. The problem with that approach is that motivation is unpredictable. It may show up strongly one day and disappear the next. Discipline works differently. It does not depend on changing emotions. It depends on decisions that were already made ahead of time. When someone decides in advance how they will spend their time, how they will handle their responsibilities, and what standards they will maintain. Discipline becomes the structure that keeps those decisions moving forward. Another important part of leading yourself is personal accountability. When someone expects other people to guide their life, it becomes easy to blame outside conditions when progress slows down. They might point to difficult circumstances, bad timing, or a lack of opportunity as the reason nothing is moving forward. Leading yourself removes that habit of thinking. Instead of looking for reasons why something cannot be done, people begin asking what adjustments might allow progress to continue. Responsibility for improvement returns to the person making the effort. This does not mean life suddenly becomes easy or predictable. Challenges still appear, and setbacks still happen. The difference is how someone responds to those situations. Instead of waiting for someone else to fix the problem, they begin asking what actions they can take to influence the outcome. And leading yourself requires clarity about direction. Someone who plans to guide their own life eventually has to decide what kind of life they are trying to build. Without some sense of direction, effort can easily scatter across activities that produce very little progress. When people take time to think about the direction they want their life to move, their daily decisions begin lining up with that vision. The way they spend their time becomes more intentional. The habits they develop begin supporting the results they hope to achieve. Over time, this connection between intention and action begins producing visible results. Progress that once felt slow or uncertain begins gaining momentum. Someone starts to see that steady effort in a clear direction has a powerful compounding effect. You see, leading yourself creates a new level of independence. When someone learns how to guide their own behavior, they become less dependent on outside pressure to stay on track. They no longer need constant reminders, supervision, or encouragement to keep moving forward. Instead, the direction of their life is supported by internal commitment. The standards they have chosen guide their behavior, even when no one else is watching. Their progress becomes the result of personal discipline rather than outside control. This transformation does not happen overnight. It develops gradually through repeated decisions that strengthen a person's ability to guide themselves. Each time someone follows through on a commitment, that ability becomes a little stronger. Eventually, people begin noticing that the structure of their life has changed. Waiting has been replaced with action. Uncertainty has been replaced with direction. And dependence has been replaced with personal leadership. What once felt like a life directed by circumstances becomes a life directed by intention. The person who once waited for someone else to organize their future becomes the person who now organizes it themselves. When that shift happens, people stop looking outward for someone to lead the way. They begin to understand that the most important leadership they will ever experience is the leadership they practice over their own life. After someone realizes that no one else will arrive to build their future for them, another change begins to happen in the way they think about what lies ahead. The future no longer looks like something that will simply appear on its own. Instead, it begins to look like something that must be built piece by piece through effort, decisions, and persistence. Many people spend years imagining the life they hope to live. They picture the opportunities they want to have, the stability they want to reach, and the kind of work they hope to be known for. But imagination alone rarely creates those conditions. A vision can inspire someone, but actually building that vision requires steady action over long periods of time. When someone accepts that their future will not be assembled by outside forces, their attention shifts toward the work of building. They start asking different questions than before. Instead of wondering when life will improve, they begin asking what actions today might move that improvement forward. This shift in thinking creates a sense of ownership over the way a person approaches their days. Time stops feeling like something that simply passes. Each day becomes a piece of the structure that will eventually shape the direction of their life. The way those days are used begins to matter much more. Building a life is not very different from building anything else that has value. The finished result is rarely created through one dramatic effort. More often it appears gradually as smaller parts are carefully put together over time. Each step may look small by itself, but the accumulation of those steps eventually produces something meaningful. For many people, the challenge is recognizing how important those small steps really are. It is easy to underestimate consistent effort because the results do not always appear immediately. Someone may spend time learning new skills, improving their work habits, or strengthening their discipline without seeing instant proof that those efforts are working. But progress often happens beneath the surface long before it becomes visible. Skills grow quietly through practice. Reputation develops slowly through reliability. Opportunities begin appearing as the result of abilities that were developed months or even years earlier. What once looked like small efforts begins creating outcomes that would not exist without them. When someone accepts the responsibility of building their own life, they start recognizing the value of these gradual improvements. They understand the life they want cannot be created through occasional bursts of effort. It must be supported by consistent actions repeated over time. This perspective encourages people to think carefully about the decisions they make every day. If the future is being built through daily behavior, then those behaviors deserve serious attention. The habits a person repeats become the tools that shape the direction of their life. Some habits strengthen that structure, while others quietly weaken it. Productive habits create stability and progress, while careless habits slowly damage the foundation of future success. Seeing this connection encourages people to choose their actions more intentionally. Another important part of building a life is taking ownership of outcomes. When someone believes others are responsible for their circumstances, it becomes easy to blame outside forces when progress slows down. But when someone accepts responsibility for construction, results begin to look different. Success becomes the result of effort applied wisely, and setbacks become signals that something needs to change. Instead of seeing difficulties as unfair interruptions, people begin looking at how their preparation, decisions, or persistence might be improved. This approach turns setbacks into lessons instead of excuses. Every challenge provides information that can strengthen the structure being built. Mistakes become part of the process rather than proof that progress cannot happen. Over time, this way of thinking produces something many people search for but rarely find through waiting alone. It produces momentum. Each small improvement begins supporting the next one. Skills improve, discipline strengthens, and opportunities begin appearing more often because the person has become better prepared to recognize and act on them. What once seemed like distant goals slowly move closer through steady effort. The future that once felt uncertain begins taking shape through deliberate construction. Someone who once hoped life would eventually change begins realizing they are the one creating those changes. This realization brings a powerful sense of ownership over the direction of life. Instead of feeling like a passenger carried by circumstances, people begin to feel like the builders of their own path. They understand the structure they are creating may take years to fully appear, but each day adds another piece to its foundation. The day someone realizes that no one is coming often becomes the same day they begin building the life they once believed someone else would provide. The responsibility may feel heavy at first, but it quickly reveals something far more encouraging. The life being built is uniquely their own. It reflects their effort, their decisions, and their willingness to take responsibility for what they create. No one else could build that structure in exactly the same way. And because they are the one building it, they are also the one capable of continuing to improve it.
begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. Day 100. Shit. Day 101. Oh, right. I hurt my back. I overdid it on something. It's all right. It's not an injury. It's just it gave me a little warning sign of, you know, don't overdo it. So I was obviously overdoing it a bit, which isn't ideal. Yeah, so I need to be careful of that, especially if, you know, if someone was to start watching this. It's incredibly important that I don't do something that would, you know, like cause someone to hurt themselves. So that's important. Guardrails and all that. Yeah, okay, anyway. So yeah, that hurt like fuck. Ow. Okay, left leg. Whew. Okay, so I've been experimenting with one kick with the right leg, so maximum 1 rep a day, and 2 reps on the left leg, because I just want to see what difference it makes. I'm going to be scientific about it, and you know, maybe we have to change it to max 2 rep. I don't know, but we'll find out. So yeah, second kick. Okay, that felt decent. I found last week that at the end of the week it was getting more fatigued. So yeah, I just need to make a note of that. I think that's it. Yep, we're good. Right. Got a viewer. Hi to my viewer. Hope you're doing well, buddy. Have a great day.